Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar. We're live from Ericsson Studios just outside Stockholm. We're delighted that you've joined us today. My name's Justin Springham and I'm your host for today's webinar. This webinar is actually the second in a series of online events around 5G that Mobile World Live has presented with Ericsson. In fact, just before Mobile World Congress in February, we held an event based on the subject of 5G for consumer, business and network evolution. But today, we're going to focus on the topic of 5G and digitalization. So, by way of introduction, my speakers today. On my immediate left is Erwin van Reyssen. He's head of 5G core programs at Ericsson. Welcome, Erwin.
Thank you.
And next to Erwin, we have Eva Hedfors. Eva is vice president and head of marketing and communications at Ericsson Digital Services. Great to have you, Eva.
Thank you.
Just before we get into the thick of things, I would like to say that we would aim to make this webinar as interactive as possible. So we're going to have some time at the end of this event for Q&A from you, the viewers at home. You should see a little box on your screen underneath where you can see us, and there's a comment box that you can post questions, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. We're also going to throw a couple of polls at you during the webinar, so we're going to try and make this as engaged as possible, and we want to hear your feedback as well on those poll subject matters. So let's get things started, shall we, Eva and Erwin? Let's kick things off with a quick overview, and I'll come to you first if I can, Eva. Digital meets 5G. What's the current state of play there?
Well, the market is seeing these digital leaders, Google, Netflix, Alibaba, and they're putting a whole new benchmark on how to engage with consumers and enterprises. And telcos are now desperately trying to catch up, and they have started to do digital transformation programs to move themselves from being a pure connectivity provider to really being a digital service provider. At the same time, we're seeing new technologies like 5G with deployments of 5G trials already this year. And we see that industry digitalization with 5G can be a great potential for operators, something they can really capture. And our recent studies show that actually industry digitalization can be a $619 billion opportunity by 2026 if operators apply the right strategies. So.
Okay, wow, so huge potential.
Yes.
Erwin, with your technology hat on, how do you see the worlds at the moment?
Yeah, what we see is that there are actually two business realities. One is 5G, which is very much about introducing new network technology to make the network faster. At the same time as enabling a lot of new use cases that we are going to talk a little bit more about. At the same time, we see digitalization as a way to automate a lot of the processes, both in BSS when it comes to engaging with customers, OSS when it is about network operations, and the actual network itself when it is about like quickly and automatically adapting to traffic streams. And 5G and digitalization are really two things that are very connected. So enabling or introducing 5G without digitalization is really difficult. So those are really, really connected. And as such, we also see that this is really something that's on the top of the CMO and CTO agenda. Because the key question really is like, how can we turn the opportunities that are provided by 5G? How can we really turn this into revenue? How can we really address and tap into new revenue streams? And then back to the technology, then we are talking very much about introduction of virtualization, cloudification of network functions, introduction of continuous deployment processes so we can roll out software much faster, and also digitalization of BSS so that we can engage with end customers in completely new ways.
Fantastic. Well, that's what our speakers think of the current state of the play in the market. But let's put it to our audience at home. We're going to open up our first poll if we can. We're going to ask our operator audience watching this online whether they think 5G and digital is coming together well, if it's aligned well in their organizations. So we're going to push the poll live. The statement is, in my operator organization, digital transformation and evolution to 5G are well aligned in terms of implementation programs and objectives. So the question is, do you agree or disagree with that statement? If you believe that they're fully aligned, it's 5. If you believe that there's more work to do, then it's anything between 1 and 4, and do let us know. We're going to come back to that particular question at the end of the discussion. So let's dive a little bit deeper into our discussion. First up, where is our industry in its digitalization efforts? Now, Eva, to pick up points that you made, I'm sensing that there's probably some work here to be done. Perhaps operators are not at the forefront of digitalization, especially compared to other industries. But what is the impact from digitalization on today's telco business?
Well, let me try to answer that question by looking at from the consumer view. And we have done a recent study on consumers' interactions with their service providers. And we do that to be able to give better guidance to our operators. And Ericsson has an in-house research organization called Consumer and Industry Labs. And they've been doing research for the last 20 plus years. And of course, they helped us with this one as well. So they did 7,000 online interviews across 7 markets. And that actually represents a view of 700 million consumers. So what did the study tell us? And it actually, consumers are really exhausted by their interactions with the service providers. We see on average it takes 2.2 attempts and over 4 days to successfully complete an interaction. And we know for a fact that that impacts, of course, satisfaction. If something takes more than a day to get done, satisfaction goes down with 30%. 1/3 of the consumers also expressed that they don't feel that the service providers understand and meet their needs. So they're really looking for a more personalized experience. We also looked a little bit into where we are on digitalization, and it's lagging behind. It's like current digitalization efforts are just mirroring the analog world. So 46% of the consumers said that they feel like the service provider are behind bad technologies like automatic replies or do not reply emails or very cumbersome and time-consuming contact me forms. The study also let us look a little bit into the future, what the consumers want, and they of course want more. They want a zero-touch experience, and they want to try new things, which is good, of course. So more than half, actually 56% of them, expect their provider to anticipate their needs and be more proactive and preempt issues before they occur. 41% was ready to try biometrics and voice authentication, just make the customer support smoother. And 51% would like to see self-healing network services that detects and solves problems in real time. So they're quite
that's
tough
the
to
utopia.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's the consumer experience, and obviously there's still work to be done there, Eva. But what does this mean for telcos and their business and their future relevance?
Right. Telcos are of course not okay with this situation. This is not what they want for their consumers. And if they could change in a minute, they would. But digital transformation is very hard. It's not easy. And it covers, organization, processes, tools. And many have legacy systems that are not designed for the needs of digital consumers. So it is really, really cumbersome. But telcos, they see this, they know this, they know they want to accelerate, and they will.
Let's get down to the juicy details then. I'm sure there are some operators that are more advanced than others. Can you reveal some names? Maybe give us some insight into a company or two that's really leading the way in digitalization.
Well, there are many front runners actually, but one that I think sticks out is Entel. So Entel is the incumbent operator in Chile. They also have operations in Peru, where they have more of an attacker position. And Intel decided that they are going to do a digital transformation to continue to stay really relevant. They are seeing competition coming from their traditional competitors, but also new digital local entrants. At the same time, they're also seeing a shift in demographics. So actually by 2025, 75% of the workforce in Chile will be millennials. And Intel, of course, wants to be an attractive employer for these, but also attract them with their services. So they decided to kick off a digital transformation, and they built it on 3 pillars. World-class customer experience, most efficient organization, and best-in-class IT systems. And they set up some pretty tough targets for themselves, I would say. So when it comes to consumer experience, here it was, it's online, it's multi-channel, and it's real time. They also want improvements in the time to market. So, for instance, changing a pricing can't take 1 month that it does today. It has to take a day. Also, time it takes to take a new service to the market has to be reduced by 50%. They also looked into TCO, and here they want to reduce the number of applications with 90% from today's 600 applications. So they're really, really aiming high. And as I said in the beginning, it's not easy. Intel has 1,000 people working from 24 countries on this digital transformation. And I actually like to quote Carlos Palito, who is the head of Intel. I think he summarizes it quite well. He says it like this: it's like rebuilding the airplane from a Boeing 747 to an Airbus 380 during the flight. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
that's a great quote. Thanks, Evan. So that's a South American example. Evan, can you give us another example, perhaps outside South America?
Yeah, so an example that comes to my mind is Verizon. So Verizon, they're offering enterprise services to large enterprise customers. And then you can think of services like mobile VPN or SD-WAN. Or things like firewall as a service, where they basically use their own data center to offer those kind of services, but also can then deploy on-prem in a very, very agile way. So what Verizon wanted to do here is have the ability to onboard network functions in a very rapid manner. So onboard and test new network functions very quickly. And then also have the ability to quickly compose and combine these network functions into new network services that they can launch in the market. What they also wanted to do is enable their enterprise customers to have much more freedom to configure and choose their services themselves in order to increase the customer satisfaction and in order to reduce the time it takes for a customer to be live. So the results of what they have been introducing there as part of their digitalization journey is that for the onboarding of new network functions, they managed to actually reduce the time from months to just a matter of days, so a huge decrease. And when it comes to the activation of their enterprise customers, there the time has been reduced from 10 or 20 days to literally a matter of minutes. So huge reductions and improvements that were enabled by the way they have deployed digitalization.
It's clear that digitalization is impacting everything, Irvin, but what does it mean to an operator behind the scenes? I mean, the back office, the networks, the systems, the organizations.
Yes.
How is it affecting that?
Yes. So what we do see is that many operators that are on this journey, that they are introducing a number of new technologies that are the pillars to enable it. First one is everything around virtualization. So the ability to actually separate the software of the network from the underlying hardware, which makes it much more easy to quickly scale up and down network capacity. But also to have more flexibility as to where different network functions are placed in the network. And this will be a very important stepping stone towards 5G, where those kind of capabilities are really crucial to enable the 5G kind of use cases. The second thing that we see is the whole demand or need in order to automate the operations of the network. So to really go from a lot of manual intervention of when it comes to configuration and troubleshooting, to a fully automated deployment of services and operations of these services. And also that becomes more and more important as you're virtualizing and as you're implementing new 5G services, because simply doing everything manually will not scale and will basically slow down the ability to quickly adjust to changing network conditions. So these two technical things, in conjunction to changing also the target operating model that operators use to run their environment, those are extremely important pillars for digitization and also then for 5G.
Yeah, so we've had a good look at digitalization, but this webinar is very much around digital meets 5G. And 5G is coming very soon. In fact, if you live in the US, you might get 5G by the end of this year, 2018. So next up, we're going to look at the challenges of starting a 5G business. Eva, in the medium term, let's look at the next 2 to 3 years. What does it mean for operators that are launching 5G? Tell us, what's the business and digital perspective for telcos with this move to 5G?
Well, we're going to see the first use cases on 5G being enhanced mobile broadband and fixed wireless access. And we're going to see a dramatic growth in the traffic. And last week, we actually released our mobility report, where we provide industry insights and on traffic and usage. And I'd like to share some of the highlights from that report, because it's quite dramatic. We're going to have in 2023 then, we're going to have 8 times more traffic in the world. The majority of this will be video. That's going to grow up to 75% by 2023. 5G will stand for 20% of that traffic, and that's 1.5 times more traffic than we see in the world today. So amazing figures. We're going to have 1 billion 5G subscriptions 2023. Most subscriptions on 5G will be, of course, in Northeast Asia, China being a big market, but also, like you touched upon, North America will have 48% 5G subscriptions. We're also seeing a rapid uptake in cellular IoT connections, and we actually had to double our forecast since just 6 months back, and the cellular IoT connections with 3.5 billion now in 2023. So as you can understand, 5G will be crucial and super important to be able to handle all this traffic in the current business, but 5G will also open up for capabilities together with digital to tap into new industry segments.
So huge growth in data traffic coming up. I think now is a good time to throw another poll at our audience. And Eva was highlighting the huge growth that we're going to see in data over the next few years, especially with the move to 5G. So we're going to push another poll out there. We want to know in your operator organisation whether you truly feel that traffic growth, and it's going to be huge, is an opportunity. So maybe perhaps you think it's more of a challenge. But the question is, in my organisation, traffic growth is seen as an opportunity. If you fully agree with that statement, it's a 5. Anything less than that, you're free to pick anything between a 1 and a 4. Obviously, if you pick a 1, you're very worried about how you're going to cope with this traffic in the future. We're going to give you maybe another 10 or 15 seconds to respond to that. In the meantime, if you do have any other questions for our speakers, please keep them coming in. We are hoping to get through as many as we can towards the end of the webinar. So hopefully you've had enough time. I'm going to ask our team to push those results live. I'm going to see if I can. There we go. I've got the results. So we asked you, in my organisation, traffic growth is seen as an opportunity, whether or not you agreed with that. Irvin, majority did agree with that. We've got 41% giving it a 5. So it is definitely perceived as an opportunity. And the second most popular answer was number 4. So between 4 and 5, we've got nearly 70% of the audience, which is great. It's an opportunity. Yes. But there are just over 10% who are concerned by this, and they feel it's a challenge. Are you surprised by those results at all?
No, not really, because like Eva already pointed out, I mean, we see a huge growth in data volume, which obviously means that consumers are really using the network in order to use services and consume content. So as such, the need of a 4G and a 5G network is very eminent. And that obviously opens up opportunities. At the same time, of course, I mean, even when the data volumes are growing, that does not necessarily mean that the revenues are growing at the same rate. So that actually means that operators also need to look into new ways to create new revenues, looking into how can we monetize our network in order to generate new revenues. So yeah, we do believe that there's a lot of potential and that those new 5G use cases can actually help operators to generate that revenue. But it really requires to address those new opportunities.
Yeah, let's dig a bit deeper on that in terms of what operators have to do to be able to maximise the potential from 5G. From a technology perspective, Erwin,
Yes.
What does 5G mean for the network and the core evolution? Is this big steps?
Yeah, so what we see with 5G is that in order to really compensate for the fact that data volumes are growing so much, we need to make sure that the cost per transported bit is reduced. So what 5G enables us to do there is actually to reduce the cost per bit with a factor 10, which is a huge improvement. So what we do see that operators are doing when launching 5G is to start really in areas where there's a lot of traffic, so typically like urban area, very densely populated areas, where 5G is connected to the LTE network as an anchor, and then connected also to the packet core network. And there we do see that there are changes in the core network in order to enable that connection. And that's what in the standards is also being referred to as the option 3. What we then also see as a next step is that operators are rolling out 5G in other areas as well, really as a booster for capacity, and also then in many cases really as a nationwide rollout of the 5G radio access network, and then connecting it to a new architecture on the core network side that's then based on the 3GPP architecture option 2. And these together will enable an operator to efficiently migrate from today's 4G network into a 5G network. So in connection to that, what becomes very important is also the ability to actually split the user plane from the control plane functionality. Because we see that with 5G, there will be lots of use cases that will require very low latencies, or we need to, as I mentioned, really make sure that we can use the network more efficiently. So therefore, it becomes very important to be able to have the user plane that handles all the actual traffic and workload to place that as much as possible to the edges of the network where the content is actually consumed, and to have a more centralized way of, let's say, managing that traffic. So that control plane, user plane is very important, and that will also be a very important pillar in order to enable the kind of network slicing that we will see for the new emerging 5G use cases.
There's a lot of attention on changes to the network and the core evolution, Erwin, but less glamorous is the OSS and the BSS side of things, but very important. What impact is 5G going to have on OSS and BSS?
Yeah, so when we look at OSS, BSS, as you rightly point out, I mean, there's a huge impact there as well in order to enable 5G. First of all, when we look at OSS, at the orchestration layer, we see that there's a huge demand and an even growing demand now with 5G to really automate the whole operations of the network. So the ability to quickly deploy new releases of the network software, the ability to quickly scale capacity where it's needed, the ability to put user plane functionality close to the edges and control plane more centrally to really manage this in an operated way. This will require new OSS capabilities. And when we move up a little bit and we look at the BSS layer, then we also see that digitalization of BSS is critical to enable 5G. Because with those new 5G use cases, we will see that operators will expose APIs and capabilities to their IoT business partners. So that requires already the ability to expose APIs. Also the ability to let customers or IoT service providers handle much more themselves, to basically choose the APIs they need, or to be able to configure and order these kind of services themselves. And lastly, also to enable an operator to monetize this in a different way, so that rather than charging a consumer, that there will be new multi-sided business models where operators actually monetize their IoT service providers in a B2B2C kind of business model. So all of those things, they basically require changes in BSS that are a prerequisite for enabling 5G. And exactly there we see that digitalization meets 5G.
Yeah. Evan makes a good point there, Evan, that 5G is not just going to be about the telco community either. It's going to affect lots of different industries. How will the evolution to 5G support other industries as they move to digital transformation?
Well, we can look into one industry, the trains and the railways, for instance. They are, of course, also going through a digital transformation. And of course, with the end game of being fully automated, right? And that's going to require a lot of more bandwidth, and it's going to require critical communication that today's systems can't support. So Ericsson, together with Swisscom, we have been looking into how to use network slicing that everyone was talked about to address these needs of the railway systems, for instance. And Swisscom is the incumbent operator in Switzerland. And they've come really far in modernizing their core network and their overset networks. So they are really 5G ready, you can say. And that's why that allows them to start exploring network slicing capabilities already on 4G. So what we have done in the network slicing project is really to find a use case around real-time surveillance. So we have put a camera on the train. We are monitoring the tracks and the platforms, preparing for this remote control of the trains. Of course, real-time location of the trains, as well as broadband services for the passengers. So with network slicing, Swisscom has then been able to dedicate 1-2 slices for this critical communication and can show the train company and the railway company that they can really meet those SLAs that are so important for their digital transformation. So that's one example.
Evan mentioned network slicing, and network slicing is getting a lot of hype in the industry at the moment. Evan, is it really the answer to some of these industrial use cases?
Yes, we believe that network slicing is a very important concept for 5G and for those new 5G use cases. Also to elaborate on that, recently we have been doing a study together with British Telecom. And British Telecom, they basically compared 3 scenarios. One scenario was to use one large network, sort of an over-dimensioned network, to run all the different traffic and the different use cases. The second scenario was to say, what if we have multiple networks that are sort of dedicated to different types of traffic? And the third scenario that was compared was to have one network, but then configured in such a way that there can be dedicated slices that are optimized for the particular use case and the quality of service demands of that particular, those particular use cases. And what the findings were of that study is that when you compare one network with network slices compared to one over-dimensioned network, that the economic benefit was 150%. So basically a huge advantage. And when we started to look deeper into where does that 150% economic benefit come from, it turned out that there are actually 2 main drivers. So first of all, they found that by using a network with network slices, that it will enable them to grow their revenue with an estimate of around 35%. And that growth in revenue, that's expected to come from a better fine-tuning of use cases and market segments. So by having a more agile way of introducing new services, even for particular niche markets, they can actually optimize and increase their revenues that was very hard to realize before. Also, by using network slices in the network, they can launch services much quicker. Just by configuring the network according to the required quality of service, they can enable and launch a service much more quickly, which also then basically accelerates the revenue stream. Now, the second part of that, what gave this economic benefit, was very much related to OPEX reductions. And there the estimate was that OPEX reductions up to 40% are possible. And those are basically derived from two main things. One was the whole automation of the network operation. So really taking away manual intervention and to automate much more using analytics, using orchestration. And the second thing was also to basically shorten the whole software delivery cycles by a much more continuous deployment type of approach. So those things together really made the implementation of network slicing beneficial compared to the other alternatives that have been looked into.
Okay, clearly a very important and useful technology. So thank you. I mean, that's the 2 to 3 year perspective, but we're going to go longer term now. How do we realize the full digital and 5G potential? Well, I'm going to ask Eva to look into a crystal ball, and we're going to let's go 5 years out. So that will take us up to about 2023. Eva, where do you think we'll be with 5G and digital transformation within 5 years?
Well, we of course have come further, and I mean, our service providers will be much more able to meet the needs of the consumers, needs more digital ways, etc. So they're going to be much better and much more proactive. At the same time, we're making a bet that our operators are going to be able to capture the business potential that we see coming with 5G and digital industrialization, using the capabilities that they have at hand. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we have research around the business potential for operators when it comes to 5G. And we did that because there's still quite a big debate on what 5G will mean for the industry, what we can expect it, and if it does bring a potential. So what we did was, of course, we looked at the two first use cases, and those are, enhanced mobile broadband and fixed wireless access. Those are good, healthy businesses, but with a moderate growth. So that led us to look at really, the 10 big industries and look at their ICT spend. And we looked at 400 use cases and took out 200 of those that are 5G enabled. That kind of gave us a picture of what the business potential are. And we can see that operators have a business potential to capture or address between 200 and 600 billion US dollars. If they decide, depending on where they decide to play in the value chain, of course. And as you can see on the picture, the 5G potential in manufacturing is big, followed by utilities and energies, public safety, and then it moves along. And what I see going forward is that, of course, telcos have now a big strategic decision to make, both where they play in the value chain, but also what types of investment they need to make in 5G and IoT capabilities that will benefit multiple industries, like real-time surveillance, augmented reality, real-time augmentation, smart surveillance, enhanced video services, just to mention a few.
So give us an insight into some of the kind of new use cases we might see, that something that 5G is going to enable that we don't have today.
Well, of course, not all 5G industry use cases will require that performance, but one that actually does is the manufacturing of blisks or blades into jet engine turbines. And the problems when manufacturing these blades or blisks is really the vibration. And the vibration makes the scrap rate be 25%, so enormous cost that comes into play here. And what we've been able to do then is we've been able to put vibration sensors into the production line and onto these blisks, and combine that with 5G ultra low latency capabilities, and actually been able to in real time adjust the production line. And that has reduced the scrap rate significantly, and actually generated an annual cost savings of 360 million euros. So
very exciting potential use cases going forward, Irvin. But from an operator's perspective,
Yes.
what do they need to invest in? I mean, to get this capability, especially in the longer term time frame over the next 5 years, where do they need to invest?
So what we see in terms of investment and needs to be able to realize this kind of use cases or benefits, we see three major things. First of all, everything around zero touch. And zero touch then really means like in the BSS layer, in the front end, to really enable customers to order, configure, monitor services themselves. Secondly, in the OSS and OSS layer, to be able to quickly configure scale services, to quickly make adjustments when let's say particular faults or performance degradations are being seen. And then thirdly, also in the network itself. So when, as an operator, you introduce these slices and you monitor the quality of the slices within the network, to be able to dynamically adjust that when you see that sort of quality of service is not being met. So that's the first thing, everything related to zero touch, to automate all of these processes. The second thing is everything around distributed cloud and network slicing. So network slicing and the ability to manage or deliver these ultra low latency requirements. That also means that network functionality and IoT applications in many cases must be run really close to where the actual device is. So that also means that it cannot always be in a central server or a central data center, but it must be in like edge clouds that are much closer to where the devices are as well. And that then requires a distributed cloud architecture around the network to be able to place those applications. And that as well then will enable the slicing use cases, because then the applications can be configured such that the nearest application is actually part of those slices that are being configured. So that's the second thing that operators need to look into. And then lastly, everything around closed loop, that's fundamental as well. Because without these closed loop capabilities, so analytics, artificial intelligence, to be able to do real-time data analytics and derive the right conclusions or the right actions to make adjustments, it will also be very hard to really tap into these 5G opportunities. So these three things are really critical. And also, if I take an operator example, I think so. One operator we've been working with is NTT Docomo in Japan. So Docomo, they also have as a philosophy that they want to enable different industries to really leverage and make use of the Docomo network. And then you can think about like car manufacturers that have car control applications that also then need to monitor the cars very, very closely. And for that matter, Docomo is also planning to open up their data centers so that actually their IoT partners can come and deploy some of these applications in those edge clouds, so that this ultra low latencies can be realized. So this is one example of an operator that is really taking those steps in order to enable the 5G use cases and the potential that Eva has been talking about.
Thanks, Evan. We're going to move to Q&A from our audience very soon. But before we do that, we have a poll. If you remember at the beginning of today's events, we asked our audience, our operator audience, whether they felt their organization was particularly aligned in terms of digital transformation and the evolution to 5G and all of the implementation programs and objectives that go along with that. So I'm going to ask our team to push the results live. And I'm going to check the results. Digital transformation and the evolution to 5G are well aligned in terms of implementation programs and objectives. Wow. Okay. So the vast majority, 46%, actually gave it a 3. So that tells us that there's obviously a lot of work to be done, or certainly a considerable amount of work to be done here. So the majority said 3. Fully aligned, we had just 6%. What do you make of that, Eva?
Well, I think it's a very natural response considering where we're at. I think here's where really digital meets 5G, and there are two driving forces. There's a CMO agenda, there's a CTO agenda, and they need to come together. We owe it to our industry, we owe it to ourselves to really make sure that we're capturing the potential that comes with both digital and 5G and putting it on the same agenda, making the right strategies to capture the business potential. I think for the ones that are ahead, share with the rest because it's an industry and we all need to go in the same direction.
Evan, agree with that? Maybe some final thoughts on the discussion?
Yeah, I agree with very much with what Eva was saying. I think it's clear that many operators, they understand that both digitalization and 5G go hand in hand, and that that digitalization is a prerequisite for 5G. But then exactly what steps to take, in what order, and exactly when, that's of course an important question. And yeah, I think the poll also shows that there, it really requires a lot of work in order to really get this right. So I can understand basically the outcome of the poll. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to take some questions from our audience now. We've had a fair bit of interest from those watching at home. First question, actually, directed to Eva, because it's about the consumer lab research. Actually, it's a fairly simple question, but it's worth making the point. Somebody watching at home has asked whether it's possible to access the research that Ericsson has produced, specifically on the zero-touch digital experience, or is that exclusive content?
No, absolutely. We do share all of our content, both the consumer lab report I talked about, the mobility report, and also our 5G business potential. So they're all available on Ericsson.com.
Thank you. Great stuff. Also, a couple of questions around 5G and when is it really going to arrive? Eva, somebody asking, when will we see the first 5G devices? Because of course, without devices, we're not going to have any industry.
It's true. We're going to see the first fixed devices at the end of this year, and actually the first smartphones, the 5G smartphones, already beginning of 2019. So next year.
And we have a question. I'm going to direct this one at Irvin. We talked in the webinar, Irvin, that there's 200 5G use cases, and they're demonstrating a huge potential. But how shall telcos approach the use case selection?
Yeah. So what we've been doing in order to work and help our customers is to group these 200 use cases in a number of clusters. So 9 different clusters. And the way we've grouped the clusters is really around 2 dimensions, 2 factors. One is go-to-market. So what role does the operator play in the value chain when realizing those use cases, and then how to go to market with that? That was one factor. The second argument is really the second factor is really what are the technical capabilities required for such a use case? So what kind of slicing would be needed? What kind of latencies are required by the application to function well? And by using those 2 dimensions, we have grouped the use cases into 9 clusters, which also means that those clusters are not necessarily industry by industry, but they are really much more focused or centered around these 2 dimensions that I mentioned.
Great, thank you, Irvin. Final question. Somebody very interested in obviously what you had to say about Intel, Eva, because one of our viewers at home has asked whether it's realistically possible to try and replicate that Intel case study in other parts of the world, or I don't know how specific that was to their networks, their demographics, the countries that they're in.
I think it's not a one-off, because you always start, with your own situation in your own sort of organization. I think everyone is now looking at how do we move to become more of a digital service provider, and your starting point can be very different. It depends on the investments you've made, it depends on demographics, of course, but in essence there are a few fundamental things that everyone sort of can capture and you can replicate, and One of them are the technologies. If they're well-proven technologies that take you from A to B, and then that can scale you, of course, that's good. If there are processes and ways of doing that in a smart way, not making all the mistakes again, you should, of course, do it with a partner who knows how to do it. So there are, of course, ways to replicate, but you can't just take, this is how they did it, you do exactly the same. I don't think that works.
Okay. We do have time for one last question. And it's a technical question, but it's to go back to the BSS side of things. I mean, just a bit more detail on how 5G is going to impact the BSS market in particular. I know we touched on OSS and BSS, but some of the challenges there.
Yes. So what I believe is very important with BSS is that it enables the operator to really open up the network to work with these IoT service providers, both in terms of in a controlled way exposing the APIs so that those applications can really get access to the information they need. Also to enable an operator to modify their sort of business models so that they can charge for example, network slices in different ways than what they are typically doing when they charge consumers. So those are a number of things that really will change in BSS. So the ability to expose APIs, the ability to have different revenue models, and then also the ability to efficiently onboard and lifecycle manage the whole relationship with these IoT service providers. So again, BSS will play a critical role, and the digitization of BSS plays a critical role in really enabling 5G and really tapping into the potential that comes with 5G.
Evan, Eva, unfortunately, we're out of time. But we've had a great review of how the worlds of digital transformation and 5G are converging and shaping the CXO agenda. We kicked things off, remember, at the start with an overview of the current state of play of digitalization and 5G within today's business. Then we reviewed the huge potential for operators to enter new digital business areas and generate new revenue. All of this can be enabled by 5G technology. And our speakers today, well, they also enforced the need for operators to realise a zero-touch operation across their entire organisation. That's the front end, the operations and the networks. As I say, unfortunately, we do have to wrap up, but thank you very much to our guests, Erwin and Eva, again, for taking part today. If you missed anything, a replay will be available on Mobile World Live's website within the next 24 hours. For myself, Eva and Erwin, thank you and goodbye from Ericsson's studios here in Sweden.